Welcome to NovoEDTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, learning strategists, and business leads. We hear about their experiences in the learning industry and predictions for the profession and the trends that they're seeing. But before we get started, a little bit about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric, capability-building platform that combines social and collaborative learning to drive performance readiness at scale. Through cohort-based experiences centered around human interaction, NovoEd taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Marriott International, and Nestle partner with NovoEd to accelerate their critical initiatives, reconnect teams, and achieve rapid alignment through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Now, let's meet our guest for today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for training trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fisk. I am the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Nicole DaCosta, who is a learning and talent development leader, a belonging and inclusion strategist, and a professional coach at Rivian. Nicole is a learning and talent development executive, inclusion strategist, and professional coach with a 25-year career spanning bold brands like Tom's, Oakley, Peet's Coffee, and of course, Rivian. Known as the thread that weaves human connection into leadership, Nicole blends strategy, storytelling, and soul to build cultures where people grow, belong, and lead with heart. Nicole, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast.
Wow. Thank you so much, Melissa. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me into this conversation. I'm excited.
Awesome. I think you're going to bring a lot of great insights to our listeners. So why don't you start by just kind of introducing yourself a bit more, talking about your role in your company?
Yeah. And when I think hearing it out loud is like, 25 years in some sort of learning and talent development capacity is like, whoa, that feels so long, but it's been a really fun journey to um build learning cultures across so many different industries, with working with a different population of people, from frontline employees and frontline managers to executives. And it's been a really cool experience. Taking a sidestep in my career and moving into more of the diversity and inclusion and belonging space, you'd be surprised, like there's so many through lines and connective threads, like with both of those worlds. Like, in order for us to have a more inclusive culture, there's a lot of times we have to learn some new things and potentially unlearn some things. So it's been a really exciting journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet. Why don't you talk, you mentioned that, you've got a whole bunch of different populations that you're working with. Why don't you talk a little bit about those different groups and like what some of the different challenges they face are?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the majority of my career, even current day, has worked with employees that are not only just like corporate based, but we have employees in the field. So whether that's in the retail and restaurant, hospitality industry, with companies like with Tom Shoes, yes, we had a corporate office, but we also had retail stores. Oakley, we had retail stores. Even with Brinker International, I don't know if that one got mentioned, but having restaurants all over the country. And so it's, how do you bring learning to a population where they're not just sitting at their desk, but they're also all over. They're in restaurants, they're on sales floors, and they don't have a computer that is always accessible. And so how do we bring learning to them in a really meaningful way that's short, that's snappy, that's bite-sized, and really is enabling them to learn on the fly?
Yeah, absolutely. And wow, what a broad group of folks that I'm sure
Yes.
that comes with a lot of different challenges. But, thinking about just workforce development as a whole, especially where, you touch a lot of different kind of parts of workforce development, what are some of the biggest workforce development
Mm.
challenges that you see and how are you approaching them?
I think a big challenge is we can't lose sight of looking at the employee's journey along the life cycle, right? So
Yeah.
from the moment they say yes, I want to work here, and we say yes to you too. You could say maybe we both swipe right on each other, um, but it's but it's what is their experience from that day all the way to the day they transition, whether that's they transition to another role, a new part of the organization, or they transition out. Because let's be honest, we're not all going to be together forever. And so, what does that look like? We have to look at how are we setting them up for success from day one? How are we creating a sense of belonging as well? So, you can't skimp on your onboarding experience. You have to make sure that it is touching that thread on why are you here and how are you connected to this overall mission of the organization. How are you, what skills and gifts and talents are you going to bring that's going to move the organization forward, and how do we teach you what you need to know along the way. Maybe it's the functional specific and technical skills to do the job of the job, but then what else can you learn to continue to grow a really rich career that you say to yourself, like, wow, I really am so glad I joined here, is opening up and unlocking opportunities for me. And then it's also a matter of how do we continue to keep those employees engaged? How do we keep them in the know? How do we provide them with opportunities to just bring their best selves to work and live and work in a really authentic way. And so, it's the journey that an employee takes from day one. How do we develop them? How do we teach them what they need to know? And how do we continue to keep them engaged? Because at the end of the day, we do want employees to stay, right? So that retention piece of that, is really going to be also important.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's so important. And you bring up something that doesn't necessarily come up when I ask that question, which is yes, you're talking to like different groups and how
Yeah.
do you kind of adapt your strategies to like meet those different groups where they're at. But also you add in another layer there, which is super important to think about, which is where in those groups, where they at within their journey. So I love that you mentioned that. I think that's so important. Uh,
Yeah. Like you have to think about it. There's a relationship that happens when we choose to work for an organization. We're building trust. We're engaging with each other, probably sometimes more than our families and our own friends. And
yeah.
so, what does that relationship look like? That's why I said you can't skimp on the onboarding experience, because creating that connection from day one is so important. How that employee feels with their manager, whether it's a manager on a sales floor, in a dining room, in a kitchen, on a manufacturing floor. Like, the relationship that you build with your employees, is really important. It builds trust, and it's going to establish how you're going to proceed and how you're going to move through your days, your weeks, your months, in a really meaningful and effective manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thinking about kind of skill sets needed
Mm.
for these different groups at the different stages in their journeys, obviously, just in that regard alone, it's constantly changing and shifting, right? But then also, of course, advancement of technology, changing workplace dynamics. Like with all of these kind of factors, what
Yeah.
strategies do you kind of recommend that people use, or what strategies does your team use to ensure that, your workforce is remaining adaptable and prepared?
Yeah. And I'm sure this is not a secret. It's You have to make learning accessible. You have to make learning accessible.
Absolutely.
With the shifts and changes in technology, not only is that changing how we develop learning and how we deploy learning, it also is also shifting how employees or people in general are consuming learning, right? We live in a very social media driven society, and that definitely affects like our attention span and how much we're going to consume all at one time, right? We
Yeah.
want snippets, we want short videos, we want little doses of information that are coming at us in really innovative and creative ways. And so I think some of the strategies for just making sure that our workforce is engaged in their learning is you gotta make sure that the learning is accessible, it's just in time, and in some cases it feels like it's just for you. I don't know how that's hard. That's really hard to do. It's how do you customize learning where people feel like, oh my God, I feel like this is speaking just to me, when you have thousands of people who need to hear that same message. But I think the first step is making sure that it's accessible, that it's digital, that it's available on their palms, if that's a capability you have in your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And how does your team kind of assess and address skills gaps, to stay agile,
Mhm.
obviously, in different where they're receiving, information in different ways or accessing things differently. Do you have like a kind of like very specific general way you kind of address skills gaps at different points for different folks?
Yeah, I think addressing skills gap is it comes through a variety of mechanisms, right? We have performance insights, in terms of what skills are being celebrated and promoted, right? Who has those skill sets to move on to the next great role or take on additional scope. But we also listen to the organization. Like we have listening sessions, we have listening focus groups, to hear from not only managers but also employees. What are some of the most important skill sets you think are required to do the job that you do? Managers, what are some of the most important skill sets you need to see in your folks on your team, that's going to do their very best work? And so it's a combination of things. And then also it's, where's the business heading? Where's the business heading? Where are we going? And what are some of the most critical skill sets that are needed, whether it's technological advances, whether it's like manufacturing advancements and or engineering. Like it could be a whole host of things, but it's you really have to tie skill gaps to the business need, and those are constantly evolving. We are working in these fast-paced environments that's just when you think you've aligned on a strategy, it's like, okay, now time to pivot and head in a slightly different
Yeah.
direction. So really is it's really also about staying agile and staying flexible and very nimble, and just being willing to go on the ride and not be too resistant, because things are going to constantly change.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that tying it back into like the business needs and where the business is going, right? Because that if that shifts, the skill sets shift and you need to make sure that you're aligning with that. So I love
Yeah.
that.
And another thing is, it's not leaving people behind. It's I mean, we can
100%. Yeah.
we can talk about the advancements with AI, right? And you have your folks in the camp of like full on adoption and like, yes, AI is the best thing that's happened, since sliced bread. And then you have a camp that's kind of like the resistant camp. I
Right.
know about it. I know I can use it. I'm choosing not to. But then there's a whole another population of folks who are like, I've heard about it, but I really don't know what it's about. And so it's, how do we also create opportunities for folks to learn and see the benefits, see how it's going to help them in their careers, and not get caught in the, well, I don't know anything about it. I'm just, it's not going to affect me. It's going to affect everybody. It's going to affect everybody. So
Yeah,
not leaving people behind.
I love that. Thinking about, skills gaps or, addressing and measuring, effectiveness of programs, do you have any core KPIs that your team kind of looks at and relies on to really, help tell the story of whether or not you're reaching folks?
Yeah, I think when you look at how do we know our learning programs are working? Um, I think there are a couple of data points that we can look at, and one of my favorites is probably to look at retention. And if people are leaving, why are they leaving? Are they leaving because they don't have career growth opportunities? Are they leaving because they're not receiving development, they're not receiving feedback, they're not receiving, those opportunities with their own managers? It's because all of those tie back to how well are we providing them with development opportunities to grow and do the very best work of their careers, right? And so I think retention or turnover is going to be a key metric that organizations would want to look at. How, who's leaving? Why are they leaving? And also at what stage in their journey are they leaving at? Are they leaving early? Which could indicate like, whoa, I signed up for something and this is not what I was
Yeah.
expecting. Or are they leaving kind of later on in their journey and saying like, okay, I've been here, I haven't had enough growth, I'm going to seek my next adventure outside of the organization. But then
Yeah.
also,
Love that.
yeah, you look at
Just
promotion.
not to interrupt, but I love just like tying that back to what you said
Mhm.
earlier about like where they're at in their career journey. I think that that metric in and of itself, the retention rate, that tells a different story when like where it's happening. You know what I mean? So like that's a
Absolutely.
really beautiful example that I just want to point out to our listeners that can be like, hey, yes, you can have a KPI, but you have to like consider like all the other factors surrounding that too.
Yes,
Sorry, continue,
absolutely.
Nicole. That was just a really
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, I mean, is learning working? Of course, you can have your, post, training, surveys and all that good stuff. It's like, yes, the smiley sheets, people felt really good, but now what are you doing with it? What are you doing with the knowledge that you acquired, during this training? Are you actually faster on the job? Are you making less mistakes? Are you working in a more safe manner? Are you retaining your employees because you went through manager, or a leadership development course and you picked up some new skills to say, oh, I've been doing feedback in a way that probably wasn't the most effective. So let me try some new skills, right?
yeah.
So those all of those things play a factor in how do we know it's working. I don't think there's a one size fits all. You really have to look at it. It's not a one size fits all t-shirt, it's a whole outfit. You got to have the t-shirt, the jacket, the pants, the jewelry. You have to have all of those things combined together to say if the outfit is working.
Yes, I love that. What a great
I had to hearken to my retail days.
I love that. That's such a great analogy. Do you have an example of like a successful case study of either an L&D initiative, a mentoring initiative, or any of the kind of programs that you've been involved in that you can point to and be like, this has contributed to the overall success of the organization?
You know what? I'm going to go with probably my favorite program in any organization I've worked for is onboarding. You got to start from day one. In every organization I've worked for, I have reimagined, revamped, rebuilt, built from scratch onboarding programs. And whether you are, say, a retail store and you have a ton of amazing products, you have new sales associates that are going to be joining, and like, what do they need to learn by when, and how do you make it easy for them? How do you make it easy for them to tell stories about their product, the brand that's going to get a customer excited to buy? You have manager onboarding programs, because guess what? Their onboarding is different. Yes, they need to understand what's, within their four walls or within their organization, but also what are the systems and processes and infrastructure that's actually supporting them to doing their jobs. And how does that now influence how they manage their team? So I think if there's, a program that I think is always going to pique my interest and light up my eyes, it will always be onboarding. And being able to develop a program that's global, and even in this post-pandemic state, April, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, it's delivered virtually, and it still, has amazingly high scores from employees, not just the week after, but 30 days in. I think is pretty impressive and something to be really proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that an onboarding program, you have like such an opportunity to make such an impact there, which is
Mm-hmm.
great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit about technology. What role does technology play in your programs, and
Mhm.
how do you leverage different tools and kind of platforms to deliver these employee experiences? You mentioned
Technology.
post-pandemic world, doing it.
Mhm.
So how are y'all doing that?
Yeah, technology is delivery. It's technology is the delivery mechanism, but connecting the learning and the content to the learner, and where they see the value, like that's where the magic is. Like we use a whole host of technologies, and even in across all organizations, I'll say, like if we're designing learning, I remember when it was, what is it, Articulate 360 was all the rage, and then Rise came out, right? It was rapid development learning tool, and I remember that hit the market and everyone was on fire. And the thing that I'll say is that just because you have a rapid development tool doesn't mean that everything needs to be built in that platform. And so now we have new technologies, like videos that can be driven by AI. Like you write a script and it does voiceover. It has avatars. You can create your own avatars. You can make yourself an avatar. I think those are all really great opportunities to bring learning to the forefront and doing it in a fast and efficient way. But like I said, it's like the content is where you truly make the connection. Yeah, you can have all the videos and the bells and whistles and all that stuff, but the content is really where it matters. And then also, how do you continue to stay in contact with the learner, whether it's through your learning management system, whether it's through your direct messaging tools like Slack or something, which is a heavy tool that we use in our organization. But yeah, I see that there's a lot more integration with AI, tools like Synthesia, where you can build those quick videos. Those are all things that are currently at play, and I see more and more coming.
Absolutely. Kind of, switching gears here and thinking about, which I'm sure technology might come up again in a second here, but thinking about,
Mhm.
over the past 5 years as learning and development has, advanced, what are some of the key takeaways that you've seen?
Hmm. Technology is amazing, but don't ever lose the human spark. Which I know it almost feels contradictory with the amount of AI technology that is making things so seamless, and people are saying like, "Whoa, I can get so much done so much faster, and I don't even have to talk to five different people to learn. Like I can just do, you have the right prompt in it, and I'm off to the races." But don't replace the human spark. Like they should work in tandem. They
Yeah.
work in tandem. I think looking at equity in access, how people are accessing learning, and is it equitable? For those of us who are desk driven, we have access to a computer and multiple screens and we can do a whole lot. But think about the learner who is on the go. And if you're in an organization that has folks that are not bound to a desk to get their job done,
Yeah.
create the learning through their lens
Yeah.
first.
I love
um, and just remember that managers are hungry for development, but they don't know where to start. And 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 they just they give them a path. We see a lot of comment or conversations and reports around the career path journey to development. It's like, well, there's something to that, so managers are hungry for development, but give them a path and tell them what they need to learn along the way, so that way it makes sense and it's in some sort of order, that allows them to learn it in a way that they can actually apply immediately to the job, and then they learn the next thing, and then they learn the next thing. So yeah, I think those are probably some of the big
Yeah.
takeaways I
I
have.
love that. And so important, just like you said, is like, yes, technology, very important, but like don't lose the human part of it. I think that actually comes up a lot here. Like people will be like, oh, as much as they talk about tech and how great it is and how it's like enhanced their programs, it always kind of comes back to, oh, but also you still have to be a human to make that all work, To kind of close on a positive note, Nicole, what is the most important lesson that you've learned along your journey that you would just pass on to someone starting out on theirs?
Oh, wow. Maybe I'll frame this up in a way where it's like, what would I say to my younger self when I got my first corporate job?
I love that.
Is oh, okay. That I would say that all of the skills and the tools that you add to your tool belt are transferable. You know,
That.
there's a phrase I used to say, and a dear friend of mine, we met in the workforce, and she used to actually report directly to me. She reminds me, said, remember when you used to tell me there's no such thing as permanent employment, there's only such thing as permanent employability. And I was like, because it was at a time when, she was young and, early in career, and like, oh, I'm gonna work at this company forever. And I was like, no, you won't. You will go on to other things, I promise you. But yeah, I think the transferable skills, and just learn as much as you can, because everything you learn is going to solve a problem later, and it also supports your permanent employability, because now you just have all of these wonderful skill sets that you can add a tremendous amount of value. So if I had that to say to my younger self, it's just remember those things. Keep adding to your toolbox. Keep adding to your toolbox with skills.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great, kind of note to end on, Nicole, because I think that's so true and couldn't be more true to where we're at right now with, tech,
Those
AI,
gaps.
everything advancing. Yes, absolutely. Nicole, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a fun conversation, and I hope someone walks away with one or two nuggets of wisdom that they can say, I want to try that, or hey, I want to think about this a little differently. And just thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great chatting with you.
Awesome, Nicole. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our listeners will walk away with a lot of good nuggets from this conversation. So thank you to our listeners for tuning in once again to another episode of NovoEd Talks.